All right. Hello. Hello, and welcome to today's live stream. So, very cool episode today. We're going to be using dream textures in order to create AI images within Blender. So, this plugin actually allows us to use Stable Diffusion locally in Blender with different dependencies that we can download right to the computer right from the plugin. So we'll get right into it. I'm going to pick off where I left off in the last live stream and use that file in order to brainstorm ideas using the AI. So we see right here, I've got Blender open already. Now the plugin is real simple to install. You go to Edit, Preferences, Add-on, Install, and you want to install from either the Blender Kit Market, or Blender Market, sorry, where you can actually support the creator, which I very much encourage you to support Carson Khatri for creating this amazing plugin to use essentially what started out as a plugin for creating textures, seamless textures within Blender that you can apply to any object, but actually now features not just image generation for textures, but a cycle render pass. So what this actually do is it'll take the render that you do in Blender and it'll do an AI pass over it in order to generate an entirely new image. As you can see right here, it'll take that base render and actually finish it off for you basically using Stable Diffusion. You can also upscale your images. You can edit images without painting. What I'm going to do is actually a bit interesting, which is to use dream textures to create and project a texture over an object and then actually do another pass over the final render using the cycles render feature for it. You can find more information on the plugin through the GitHub right here. There's plenty of discussions and reported issues as well to find some solutions if you experience any other problems. But within Blender, once you install the plugin, it'll show up as a paint plugin. So paint dream textures. Once you have it activated, you can search here for different models that are located on Hugging Face. That's where dependencies or libraries for Stable Diffusion are generally shared, open source. As you can see, I've installed two right here, which is Stable Diffusion 2-1 and Stable Diffusion 2 Depth. I'll explain the differences between the 2-1 and 2 Depth once we get really into it. But there's a bunch of other ones you can download. For example, I know there's one for Into the Spider-Verse style. So there's one that's here, Spider-Verse Diffusion, which will actually mimic the style from the movie. I can download right here. And you can see right there, it's fetching all the data right from Hugging Face and installing it straight onto your computer. By the way, for those watching, feel free to ask any questions or contribute on the chat. It is live, so in this format, I tend to maybe need to take a moment and remember where something is, or perhaps there's a better way for me to do something. So feel free to interact with me on the chat. Now that it's downloading that model, I'm going to see if I can just minimize this and continue working in 3D. So as I was saying, we have this view right here. And before we get into what the depth model does, let's look at what Dream Textures does to create seamless textures. So if I go into the UV editing space, and right here next to my UV editor, I'll actually create let me actually create just a new space here. For example, in scripting, I'll override this one just to show you what the image generator does for textures. So once I'm in here, I'm going to set this workspace into the image editor. Now, plugins will show up on the right-hand side. When you hit N, it'll expand this menu on the right side. And I can head over here to Dream for the Dream Texture plugin. And here at the very top, you want to first select the model. So I'll select Stable Diffusion 2-1. And then you can actually select what kind of image you want to generate. You could do texture, you could do something resembling more photography. You could do concept art. You could set a custom type of image, or you could do file batch. So this is where actually you can set multiple lines of different prompts that you want to try out, and it'll do all of them not at once, but sequentially, so you don't have to keep feeding it one by one. In this case, I'll keep it to texture just to show you the original intent of this plugin. So for subject for texture, I could put seamless brick wall with graffiti. Or more specifically, let's see what happens if I call out some neon graffiti. Okay. You always got to work on the size with a 512 by 512 or increments of that. But for now, for just figuring out a very base model, I'll go with that. If I wanted to edit a source image, meaning painting out a certain area or editing, basically building off of a previous image, I could check this box right here for source image and tweak those settings. That's something I have to kind of test out a bit more to get perfect. I've had sort of inconsistent results with that so far. So I'll stick to just showing you the seamless texture for now. So now that I have all these settings set up, AI upscaling will come out later. I can go ahead and hit generate, which I cannot because I am still downloading the model for the Spider-Verse. So it's taking quite a bit to download that model. It'll tend to happen that these models will range anywhere from 2 gigabytes to 7 or 10 gigabytes, depending on the model. If you wanted to check out more about what kind of models are available, you can always go to Hugging Face, the AI community for building the future. And you could search here different models. So we search for stable diffusion, what's available. We can see we can also download directly from this website and bring this into the plugin rather than installing directly from the plugin, but I just find it's easier to do right from the plugin. Also, not all models have the same terms of use, so make sure that it's either open source or that you look a bit into opening what's called over here a key, right? So you can authenticate the fact that you're using these different models. And it's easy to find out whether you can use those or not by just simply checking them out on this website. To check out, say, the Spider-Verse model that I'm downloading now, we can see what kind of images have also been created by some people. So you can see the model that I'm downloading right now can generate different characters in the style from the movie. Sample images used for training. So these are some frames that were taken from the movie. So it just basically feeds frames from the movie. The AI uses Stable Diffusion model to understand what's in these images. So you can basically turn text prompts into these images in the style of the movie. All right. Still waiting a bit for that model to finish downloading. So in the meantime, I'll use a separate Blender file to show you the seamless texture. And then we'll go back into using the depth model in this original file I had opened up. I'll give that new file and blank it out. And I can just set this one into the image editor. So I hit N to open up my plugins over here, go to Dream, and select that model right here, the 2-1. I'll select a texture and I'll type in once again, seamless brick wall with neon graffiti. Keep that same size, and right here I'll hit generate. Well, you might not see anything happening at first, and that's because I have no image open. When I hit generate, it'll actually generate a new image that I have to switch to. I don't actually see it working. There's always some nuanced thing I'm missing out on. Viewer node. Or is it because I'm downloading the model in the other file that I'm not able to? You can also put up the amount of iterations that you want. So instead of having one option pop out by one single click, you can also hit on it a few times and generate multiples at once. All right, waiting a bit here for the model to finish downloading. I will open up a file I used recently to kind of show some of the examples that can be done through the Stable Diffusion. So I'll go ahead and go to my desktop and open up one of these. So this was the first round of tests that I did with the AI. Oh, this is a different AI. Second round of AI tests. Here we go. So with this one, if I bring up the UV editor, you could actually see, once I go into generate, no, something is glitching out on my Blender and it's not allowing me to use the plugin. If we give that a moment to just load up, in the meantime, the depth model, as I'll explain why there's a difference between the Stable Diffusion Model 2-1 and the model for Stable Diffusion 2 depth, has to do with this new version of Dream Textures, where it'll actually use the depth in the model to use that as information for generating an image. So as you can see here, what a depth model looks like is sort of, it looks like there's fog in the scene. So it kind of makes whatever's close to the frame look brighter and whatever's further away fade out. So that gives a read from the camera how far away things are. So it actually is able to use that data as something that helps generate the image. So you'll see here the progression from the pure noise that it then generates a full image based off of that 3D model. We can also see the outpainting, so we can continue painting on beyond the frame. And upscaling. So at the end pass, once you get a result you're very satisfied with, you can bring that up to a higher resolution, up to 4 times what the 5x12 5x12 would do. If I click on texture projection, that's basically what we'll be doing for this file, right? So we'll have this arrangement of surfaces that we can then take that 3D file or select the faces that we want to project the texture onto. We'll start out having some noise, and once that's resolved a little bit or processed by the Stable Diffusion model being worked by the plugin Dream Textures, we'll start to see an image come to life over the 3D model. The interesting part will be to use Dream Textures as well to have Stable Diffusion process a new image over top of the render for this model. Let's see how we're doing here with the plugin. So we're still downloading one of the dependencies here that I had hit. It has many, many different aspects to it. All right, so we just finished. So now that we have the Spider-Verse one as well, we have 3 models that we can work off of. So I'll go ahead and save my preferences on the bottom left and try out this seamless brick texture that I had asked it to generate earlier. There we go. So we see that the model is starting up. And as it's starting, it does take a little bit of time to do your first one, right? Oh, that wasn't as long as I expected. The depth model might take longer. I know there's some times where different models need to take on a bit more time in the beginning just to kind of gather some of the files that it needs to use. So you see here we got a seamless texture. We can test it out over one of the surfaces. So I'll go into my material preview and I'll select these faces, go to my materials, and instead of the water material, I'll replace that material slot with a new one. There we go. Move that up. And I'm going to use that image of the brick texture that I just generated with the AI to apply over these surfaces. So I'll bring this up, open up the shader editor. And for this new material, just hit new. And I can use the image texture node. You can also do this from the right hand side if you're not that used to the shader nodes. You can go over here to principled, and for base color you could click right here on the circle and select image texture to then select the image. So you can see that popped in the node where it was supposed to. And I'll hit open, or sorry, not open. I'll just select over here for the drop down and select that new brick texture that I generated. I'll eliminate the water texture and the emissive texture, or there we go. So we can see that brick texture being applied over the surface here. And if I add a mapping node, I can verify whether it's actually seamless or not. So if I go to mapping, plug that in here to vector, and increase the scale value. So if I go to 3 instead of 1, I'll have to add another node here for coordinates, texture coordinates, so that it'll read properly. Give that another moment to load. There we go. So if I go into a top view, I can actually see that I can see how the pattern repeats, but I don't see any seams. So it is in fact pretty seamless. Granted, a brick texture lends itself to being able to be pretty seamless as it's not that organic and it's mostly regular. But we didn't get our neon graffiti. So that's what I mean. Sometimes you might not get exactly what you're expecting, or you need to define your prompt a little bit better. So we could try this again by going over to where I was and try seamless brick texture or brick wall with neon graffiti painted over it. Let's see if that adds enough specificity. Again, we can also add iterations here if we wanted to create more than one. We see it's having some trouble understanding how to paint over this material, but nonetheless, I could also ask it to do graffiti drawings on a white wall. Let's see how it does with that. Oh, it looks like it's still thinking about the last one. It says starting. We'll go ahead and cancel out of that one and hit generate again. And give it a moment to compute through that. The photograph version, oh, there we go. The photograph version can also be really interesting for creating some textures. If you're going to then map them yourself, you can ask for flat photographs in a texture. But since I got a graffiti now, you could also use different node setups to combine different materials together in the shader editor. But now that I've shown a bit of how the seamless texture generator works, I'll go into my camera view. And from my camera view, I'm going to enlarge this as much as possible so that the AI can work its magic properly. And I'll show you now how the depth map comes into play. So I'll open up the plugin here from the 3D viewport, switch the model to diffusion 2/depth, and go from texture to photography. Now in here, I can set up many different parameters for the photography AI image generation. But for subject, I'm going to place, I'm going to type in basically a city that resembles a motherboard from a computer. I'm going to add in neon lights, futuristic architecture, surreal environment. And then I'm not sure if Stable Diffusion will work, or sorry, if the plugin Dream Textures will work like similar Stable Diffusion models on other softwares, but typically you can add in some details of how you want it stylized based on the renderer that we're using. We are asking for photography. but just in case, I'll add in some things like high detail, photo real, or photorealistic. You can even call out maybe Unreal Engine render, even though I'm using Blender, right? Unreal Engine or Octane render as well. You could throw those into the mix. Next for framing. So I'm gonna put in basically a long shot because we're up, way up into the sky. Position, aerial view, film type. So we'll go with cinematic. Camera shutter speed. We can do deep depth of field. And then shooting, so the type of lighting, we can just, or film still, studio portrait, outdoor. We'll go ahead and do just photograph. And then the lighting. So we could do mostly silhouetted, harsh flash. Let's go with ambient lighting. And with that, I will go into edit mode. So I'll hit tab in order to be able to edit the object, and I'll select all the faces that are visible. So really, I'm only able to apply it to one face because it's way out over to the side, and I actually just arrayed that face several times over. The problem is with this face, it's not optimal to use for this situation right now, because if I go into solid mode, you'll see there's actually many different faces here, so it might take some time beyond what's reasonable to calculate this. So you have to make sure that your geometry is optimized for this type of process. So in order to do that, I'll just go into my modifiers, and rather than have it subdivided, I'll keep the arrays, but I will eliminate those cells by going to decimate and removing some of those faces by using the planar feature here for decimating. So if I go to planar, might take a second to calculate, and then hit apply on this modifier, I will have significantly reduced my faces on this square. There we go. Now that's a single face. So I can hit tab, go back to the camera view, apply my arrays so that each one of these is its own face rather than just the original. I'll hit A to select all the faces and apply this texture over all the faces. And then I can hit project dream texture, right? So there we go. That's the setup that we want to do for creating this AI image and having it directly apply itself onto this geometry and use the geometry as reference for generating the AI image. So we set up the stable diffusion model to -depth in order to use depth. We set up a prompt, and then we actually set it the category in this plugin to photography, and made sure that we used a setting that was intentional to the camera view that we're using for this one. I am in solid view, so we have to go into material preview in order to see when it starts to work. So we see here that it's actually going through a process here. What does it say? Requesting redraw. Not sure what that means. It might mean that I need to change my camera view a little bit, or get out of my camera view and go into the 3D view. I'll extend my clipping range here so that I can sort of grab all of it into view and try the project dream texture once more. There it is again, requesting redraw. I'll switch again to, instead of depth, I'll use depth and color. And give that a second, see if it doesn't have to work through that requesting redraw. In the meantime, to go over the advanced settings, on the advanced settings, the amount of steps is basically the amount of, more steps will typically mean more resolution or more detail. However, there is sort of a threshold where you're not getting more detail or you're not getting the image developed anymore, and it's actually just creating slight variations, or depending on the scheduler they're using, much more drastic variations. The CFG scale You can always hover over the values here to see what it is that these do. So you see how strongly the prompt will influence the image. So if you already have some materials on there or some geometry on there and you want to reduce the amount of influence that the AI itself or the prompt itself will have over what you already have working, you can tweak that here. The scheduler is actually what will create the most drastic difference, right? So if I were to actually take away some of these elements from the prompt, oh, doesn't, yep. And go down and switch the scheduler to a different one. Some schedulers will work better with different sort of prompts. So I've found the most success with Euler discrete or DTPM as well. And you can find documentation on what these do or what these mean as far as how it uses a stable diffusion model more in depth. Step preview, this is basically, does it feed us live how the AI is working this image into our model, or can we have it lag? It depends on the performance of your computer. If it's slowing you down a lot, you may want to turn this down to none or fast. And if you turn it to accurate, you're basically seeing it real time as the AI is working. Okay, so let's see if I can't. I'm keep getting this message to attempt a redraw. Let me see if I can't select different images or individually select the surfaces I want the texture projected onto. Perhaps I had selected too many faces by selecting all of them of the object. So let's try this now. Nope. So the best thing to try when something's not working like that is to simply close the program and open it up again. Oops. Here we go. Let's try this one more time. Otherwise, I will show you on a blank file rather than the file I am attempting to do for the project. There we go. So it says starting. I'll go into the material preview so we can see when the AI actually starts applying the image over the model. There we are. So we see our typical squares, and now we see it applying what looks like a similar image to the renderer over these objects. So the prompt that I had put, or that I had asked for, was a city that resembles a motherboard from a computer. And it looks like, I don't know if it took the view that I actually had and then applied that over the entire object. We'll try it again. And what we can do to try again with the same prompt and get a different result is under those advanced settings. After I'm done selecting all the faces here, under advanced settings, we can change the seed. No, the seed is for the later part. What we can do is simply change the scheduler. So instead of Ural discrete, I'll go ahead and try Ural ancestral discrete. See what kind of results we get with this one. So we see it working through there. Strange. I never had this result where it does basically an output that looks very similar to my camera view in this situation. Oh, right here I had it set to random seed. So you can set seed over here. Seed is basically this random value that could determine what your results are. However, if you keep the same number for the seed, it'll randomize less, right? So from number 5 to number 6, the change may be completely random, or it may, seem like it's completely different. But if, say, I did this view with seed number 5, and then I did a different view from seed number 5, then it'll be more consistent in how it generates the two images from different angles. So I keep hitting project here to get a different result, and it's not quite changing too much. What it should be doing is applying this image, I think, in a way a bit differently over the object. What I'd be expecting is, if we go over to the UV editing space, we could see here that the image that it's generating is this one, right? and that it should be applying this image, which fairly resembles the layout that I had set. It should be applying each one of these rooftops or each one of these surfaces onto the geometry in a way that matches the view. But it's not doing that. It's just applying the entire image over each face. So what I'm going to do is go back to my camera view, select this face here so that I have it selected on the right side over here. And I can actually just move each one of these corners. Yeah, it actually matches perfectly with the camera. So it doesn't seem like the application of the image in this case over the geometry is working as it should. But in doing this, you'll see that ultimately this is how you would tweak it, although I didn't expect to have to tweak it this much. It's not the kind of results I've had in the past. But I can essentially rebuild this scene made by the AI by projecting the AI generated image over the 3D geometry. We will try a different prompt and see if we can get a more consistent result. So if I actually extrude, nope. I thought if I'd extruded that box, I'd get the sides of the buildings on there, but no, I'd have to capture that as well. So I'll try to go more overhead, and I will request in the prompt, very specifically, I'll say that it's an aerial view of, not rooftops, of city blocks that resemble a computer motherboard. So let's try that out. Hit tab, select the faces I want to apply this to. I'll go back to my camera view so that it matches. It'll always use the view that you have in order to generate that AI image that it's going to project onto these geometries. Okay. So we see there we're getting some more interesting results. Now that I modified the UV for these two, it seems like they're too zoomed in, but that's fine. At the time being, I'll leave it as it is. I'll add another face or another surface sort of as a base mesh underneath and select that as part of the AI image generation as well, so that I have sort of a backplate that'll catch some other textures. So I'll select this whole array of geometries and the bottom plate, hit tab, select all these top faces for the last time, as well as the bottom face right under this array. There we go. Project dream texture. So we're generating a new one. And I turned off the random seed. So each time they're going to be similar results. So I'll turn on random again and hit project. Cool. It looks like we're getting some like black and white results. I'll just go ahead and keep hitting it and see what other results I start to get. Okay. I'll go over to my UV and very simply just hit U on these surfaces to unwrap, so they unwrap evenly over the image. Oh, I see what I'm using another issue. So, or I'm running into another issue. This image is great, actually. What's happening is we see it that's this area that's far away is in focus and the foreground is out of focus. That actually does look like a city as a motherboard, or a motherboard as a city. I didn't mention this before, but all the images that you generate from the AI are also saved. So you can always go back and see all the other images that the AI has been producing and kind of compare them side by side or paint one of them into the other. So one of the things that I had set here was a deep depth of field, which I think may be actually just resulting in something that's far away being in focus and then keeping what's close to the camera out of focus. So instead, I'll just do a fast shutter speed, which will hopefully keep everything in focus. So once again, select all my faces. And then we'll get into the last part of using Stable Diffusion in Blender, which is that cycles pass. I'll keep it on Euler and Central. I'll change the steps from 25 to 60. now that I know that I'm getting some pretty consistent results. And I'll hit project dream texture, and it'll take a bit longer. You can always keep track of the amount of steps that you're using down here. So we see there, we're almost at 60. Now it looks more like a facade. I'm gonna hit project again. So this is what I mean again, depending on the scheduler that you're using, more or less steps would be optimal for you to use. That's pretty cool. I mean, they look like windows, but they could be buildings. I'm gonna roll with it. I'll tab to exit out of edit mode. And with this scene, I'm now gonna render this in cycles with the settings that I had set in the last stream, but I'm actually gonna go down here and enable dream textures. So right here in the render settings, by enabling dream textures, I now have very similar settings as the generator here for the geometry's texture. I'll hide out that part so we just focus on this part on the right. And the model that I have set here could be the depth model. It could also be any other model. So I'll try first with the depth because we're actually able to use depth once more in this render pass, meaning we can use the data not just of the image itself, but a secondary image that presents information about what's close to camera, what's far away from camera, which is just more geometrical information. So for pass inputs, we'll do color and depth. Enable the Z pass. Yep. Noise strength. So that is the ratio of noise to image. A higher value gives more creative results. So the higher this number is, the more it will disregard the model that you have and start from pure noise. So 0.75 is fine. It's like keeping 1/4 of the image alive. We'll go into the prompt. And so switching from prompt texture, we'll go to prompt photography. And I'm actually just going to copy paste the prompt that I had set up over here into the final render pass. Set that to long shot, set it to an aerial view, set it to cinematic, fast shutter speed. We'll set it to a photograph. And once more, we'll set this to ambient lighting. There it is. Okay. Now, once I hit render, we're on our way. So one final thing, the render also has to be set to the same proportions that we used earlier, to 512 by 512, or else it just won't run. So it's more of a square image this time. So I'll hit render, render image. And we'll see there with the render settings that I had set, with the lighting that I had set previously, which I forgot I had those spotlights in the scene, but oop, and I crashed, which can happen. So I'll open this back up. You can always go to recover, autosave, and then see when your last autosave was. This one was from a minute ago, so I wouldn't have lost anything. And make sure that I get my prompt back in there. Something's going off on my desk. Anyway, I'll hit render. Ooh, I have the wrong image proportion. So I'll go ahead and save. Remember to set your aspect ratio to 512 by 512. And in this scenario, I'll also turn off these area lights that I had set for the render and just bring in some more ambient light. There we go. Hit render. Okay. Crashed again. Not sure what might be causing this crash, but what I'll do is for the dream textures portion, I'll set a different model. So we'll try the Spider-Verse diffusion model. And instead of color and depth, we're only able to use color with this one. And I will set this one to custom this time rather than photograph. So we take away some constraints from the render. Save. Change my aspect ratio again and hit save. And we'll hit render. See if I don't crash this time. Nope. Not sure why I might be crashing so much. Know if it's because I'm streaming and it's just too much on my GPU. I'll turn off the denoiser because I don't need it in this case since the AI is just passing over the image that I render. And what I'll also do is I will purge some materials out of this file. So I'll go up here to orphan data. Nope, no materials to purge. We'll try it once more. And it's a shame that in the live stream I'm not able to show it actually work, but I will come back when I edit the video after troubleshooting and see, report why it is that I'm crashing so much and show a final result. I'll try it out with a new blank file just so I can at least show that feature. So if I have this model, let's say like just a cube, hit Shift A, Shift A to add a plane, and I hit Tab and have all of these, select all these surfaces or all these faces and hit Dream. We can use the depth model, and I can set it to concept art this time. And for environment, I will say a wooden house in the middle of a field of purple flowers with not a sci-fi genre. We'll do like a fantasy genre. And depth and color, project dream texture. I think I'm using the defaults here for the scheduler and for steps. You got to go into material preview to see the results. So you see it didn't have much to work with this geometry. If I introduce some cut loops and start extruding some faces, I can start to get more interesting results. Okay, so I'll change from LMS discrete into Euler ancestral as I was using earlier. Tab edit mode, hit A, project dream texture. There we go. Okay. So with that, I will now, I'll save in case I crash again. Let's see if it was something that I had in my previous file that wasn't allowing me to actually execute the render. I'll go into the render settings, get into cycles, get into GPU support, hit dream textures, copy paste my prompt, go from texture to concept art, paste that in, and here we go. Go back to settings and set it to a 512 by 512. Hit render. Okay, so yeah, something I had in my previous file was causing it to crash, which is a shame. I'll have to simplify that file in order for the AI to do that pass, because you'll see here it has generating after the image here. And if I go onto the top right, I can hit dream textures here, and that is what dreams textures came up over my original image. So for the render settings, because I'm not too happy with that, I'll go down into the render settings for dream textures. I'll open up the advanced section and then go from LMS discrete back into Euler ancestral, which is the one that I used over here. That worked a bit better. I'll add some more steps, around 25 steps. I'll add 60 and hit render again. I actually look through my camera and just kind of position my geometry just a bit better. There we go. And hit render image. So once it's got that one done, it's now generating. You'll see there once it finishes the render, it says generating off of Dream Textures. And now that it's finished, I switch over to see what Dream Textures did. And it basically overrode my view completely and generated a new image over it entirely. So in order to not have it influence the image so much, we'd go back over here. And noise strength, we can set to 0.25 rather than 0.75. And we'll hit render again. Then just go straight right now to Dream Textures so that I can see the final result after producing the render and after applying Dream Textures over it. So we see it actually didn't change much at all. It almost just, it basically just modified what the texture on the actual object looks like. So we'll try something else. Rather than 0.75 or 0.25, we'll go to 0.6. And rather than the Spider-Verse diffusion model, we'll go ahead and use the depth model so that we can not only rely on color, but we can also rely on depth. So that should keep us more true to the original geometry that's being put into the render. So as a final pass, we'll see how this looks and we'll call it here. I will troubleshoot and see what was going on with my other file that was causing the AI to crash. But it seems like with much simpler geometry, it works much better. As now we're talking, this looks much, much better. And notice how it's using the lighting in the scene as well. So I only have the one default point light here, which I hit rendered in this view. We could see it actually stayed true to the lighting used in the scene at the moment. So if I, instead of turning that off, if I change that kind of light from a point light into an area light, turn it up, move it further away, and maybe turn it a bluish color. Or maybe if I turn it, let's turn it into like a warm tone, and then I'll duplicate it over to this side to hit this side of the building with a blue tone. And now it'll truly be the last test for this one. So go to normal and hit render image. And as that renders, I just want to thank you for watching. Once again, sorry for the technical difficulties there, but it's always with these experimental tools, you don't really know what's going to happen. Even if you practice it before, there's always special considerations to take. But I'll chop this up into the highlights and the more valuable bits of information on how to use this plugin. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. I'm excited to see how this tool is going to change the way that all 3D artists work, but the way that it's going to influence my work. So stay tuned for that.